This is Apologetics Live. To answer your questions, your host from Striving for Eternity Ministries, Andrew Rappaport.
All right, we are live, Apologetics Live, here to answer your challenging questions. Tonight we're going to have the Canadian Atheist is back in the house. We have Matt Slick from carm.org in the house, and the two of them are going to have a discussion, so that'll be enjoyable. But before we get to that, we're going to get that soon, although we have two things. First, we do have a question that's going to come up from Anthony Silvestro in a moment, but Justin, I don't know if you saw this, and this is actually could end up affecting Matt, and he may not realize it, but do you know that the Governor Newsom out there in California has just done a bill that will say that every corporation needs to have at least on their board, needs to be represented by an LGBT and or minority race, in other words, black. So, corporations, that includes every public corporation, which would be every ministry, which carm.org is actually still based in California. Every ministry, every church would end up needing to have an LGBT person of their board. And if they have 9 board members, they must have at least 3 of those people represented. A third must be represented there. And they're not even a third of the population. Did you hear about this?
Yeah, I actually read some of it. That was incredible. I mean, we've been warning about dictators for a long time, and warning about the Gestapo tactics and mafia style tactics for a long time. And if this surprises anybody, it's because your head's in the sand. Yeah, and you've not been paying attention.
All right, so we're going to go to the car. Anthony Silvestro is traveling. Let's go to one young Mr. Silvestro. How are you, sir?
Hello, I'm good.
And for folks who don't know, this is the younger version of Dr. Silvestro. This is Anthony Silvestro III.
And I handsome one.
Have a question for me. So
the one with more hair.
Yes, he has way more hair. This is true.
So, I was just doing my homeschooling videos of my wonderful homeschooling called Veritas Press, and they came up with the question of, at some point, is it okay for a Christian to lie for a good reason? And this was the example. This is World War II, Adolf Hitler, the Nazis. They're chasing some Jews down your street while you're sitting in your chair reading a book. All of a sudden you hear a knock on the door, and there are 3 Jews, 1 father and 2 children, running for their lives. And they ask, can I please come hide, and please hide my children first? And so you let them in. You hide them, and then you go back to reading your book like nothing happened. A few minutes later, you hear a knock on the door again. You open it. It's the Nazi soldiers. They ask you, hi, have you seen any Jews come this way? We have proof and belief that they have come down your street. What do you say now?
Okay, so this is a classic example in what's called situational ethics. Okay, now I'm going to give you the big term and then I'll explain it. I'm what's called a non-conforming absolutist. It means that I don't believe that a situation changes the absolute standard. So I will say it is always 100% of the time wrong to lie. Always.
And I'm going to say amen.
Now, here's the thing with it. The situation that this book puts you in, and the way that situational ethics put it in, it's as if it's only one of 2 choices. And this is a logical fallacy sometimes called the either or fallacy, the fallacy of the excluded middle. What it is when they set it up, it's as if you only have one of 2 choices. You can only say yes or no. But I have a lot of other choices without lying. I could get in their face and say, how dare you ask me such a question? I didn't answer it. But I could act in such a way that they will be like, we're out of here. I can just, say yes and accept the consequences. Okay, that is an option without lying. The reality is, I actually know someone that I met that used to fly into China with Bibles, and it's illegal to do that. He was committed to not lying. Here was the interesting thing is they would ask him as he comes in with suitcases, what's in your suitcases? He'd go, Bibles and gospel tracts to give away. And they would let him pass because they didn't believe him. They were like, there's no one that's going to come in and say that. Okay. So he chose to do that. He never lied. He had been in and out of the country when I met him 14 times, never lied once. Okay. So God could protect us in that and tell the truth. But there's other things you could do without actually telling a lie, like answering something different.
Yes.
Asking why they're asking that. The reality is if they've come into the house, they probably think that they're already there. So the idea that, well, if you say they're not there, are the Nazis going to leave? No, the Nazis are still going to raid the house anyway. So, there's a lot of different ways you could respond to that. Now, let me give you a real life scenario with me. I was in New York City. I was probably either late teens, early 20s. But I had a guy that pulled a knife on me and asked if I had a wallet. Now, that seems like the same situation, doesn't it? I could say no and lie, or I could say yes and be without my wallet, right? That's what it seems. There's a third option. Now, don't ask me why the Lord brought this text of scripture to my mind, but he brought this to my mind, the text with David when he went to the Philistines and started acting crazy. So that's exactly what I did. I started having an argument with myself on whether that man had a knife or didn't have a knife, whether he wanted my wallet or didn't, or whether I actually had a wallet or not. And he just assumed that I was so crazy that I couldn't possibly have money, and he walked away. And I walked away laughing. Did I lie? Didn't lie at all. But I also didn't give up my wallet. I chose a third option. And it's the same thing with this. There's a third option.
Wow.
Does that help you?
Yeah.
It's a good answer.
All right. Does that satisfy you?
Mm-hmm.
You got to speak up, Anthony.
Yes.
Say thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Well, we'll look forward to your dad coming in later. All right.
Bye.
All right. Let's bring in one Mr. Math Slick. And Mark, the Canadian Atheist. Welcome back. So let me do a quick. I keep forgetting to even introduce myself, but Matt Slick. For folks who don't know, Matt's not feeling too well, but he's still wants to try to do this. I'll be praying for him. Matt is with CARM.org, Christian Apologetics Research Ministry. Great site for everything apologetics, and lots of other things too. Lots of stuff on world religions and things like this. CA Atheist, Canadian Atheist, is got a podcast and different. Although I haven't seen any. The latest podcast I saw was from you is the one with Aaron Ra. Have you had any newer ones? Oh, you're muted.
Hey, how are you? It's been difficult just with COVID restrictions in Canada. We're trying to be responsible, and my actually podcast partner Dean has also been a little on the ill side. So what I have done is I've posted a couple of kind of like, I'll call them cheater podcasts with the link to the discussions that we've been having. But Dean and I are set to get together tomorrow to record episode. I believe it's 122. So
someone's asking what's wrong with Matt. He's having some issue with his stomach. But this is not unusual. I've actually seen this with Matt at debates. I actually, Matt, I don't know if you remember this, we were in Dallas for a debate where 1 second, I literally thought you were going to just fall asleep before you got up to do your opening. You were like looking like you were going to fall asleep right there at the table. You were so exhausted. And then you got up to speak and it was like, where'd that energy suddenly come from? You're muted now.
You're muted, Matt.
It started before that outside. All of a sudden, I remember being out there, and I could hardly keep my eyes open. I don't know what happened or why it happened, but if I'd have just laid my head down in 20 seconds, I'd have been out.
Yeah.
And then while Matt Dillahunty was doing his thing, I was struggling to stay awake. I don't know what it was.
Yeah.
And then when I got up there, I was wide awake. So
if I remember correctly, on the debate with David Smalley, your stomach was bothering you, I thought.
Maybe.
I thought it was like your stomach was bothering you. Asked Neek to pray for you. You called her in prayer, and then you felt fine when you got up.
Yeah.
We'll do the same thing.
Yeah, I just had some baking soda. I took some and a little piece of bread here I'm nibbling on. So hopefully, and I just did a dry heave. So we'll see what happens. All right, let's give it a go.
All right.
So one of the things, actually, first, I didn't want to interrupt Anthony when he was driving, but during our last discussion, and Matt, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. By the way, hey, it's nice to finally talk to you. What Anthony asked me a question during the start of our very last discussion, and I didn't answer his question, and I just want to take a couple seconds to answer it now.
Well, he'll come on later, so.
Okay, all right, we can just push pause till then.
Yeah,
and then Justin has been wanting to talk morality for a long time, so that's actually what I was really hoping we could get into tonight. Rather than rehash what we've talked about in the past two discussions, I thought maybe we could take a different slant and maybe give a new topic, so at least Matt doesn't fall asleep. I don't think I will, but
Let's go for it. I don't care.
I'm gonna take all of us out and let two guys have a discussion. We'll pop in every once in a while, but that way you can. There's the chicken. We always have to have the chicken. John with the chicken. What do you call him? Commander. All right. So we'll let you guys have a discussion, and Matt, if you're not feeling good, then let me know, and we'll pop in and we can have that morality discussion. Go for it.
Go ahead. I'll just follow your lead, and hopefully it'll clear up in a little bit.
Cool. Well, like I said, it's nice to finally talk to you. I've been in. This is going to come across weird, but an admirer for some time, and I think my favorite discussion I ever saw you have was with Kent Hovind. It was fun. It was fun to watch. It was almost like a Schadenfreude kind of thing to watch two Christians go at each other like that. It was kind of funny, but I do have a degree of respect for you and for what you do. I think it's admirable that you at least try to give to put forth some arguments for the things you believe. There are lots of people who don't do that. They just kind of say this is what I believe and stick their head in the sand. So kudos for actually standing up and trying to defend. From what I see as the defensible, but that's irrelevant. So what I was really hoping to talk about today, and much to my chagrin, Justin's in the background, was morality. We had a pretty good discussion after the first time I was on apologetics, but I've heard you talk about morality a lot, and so I want to get your thoughts on that. I'm an atheist. I saw you kind of chatting in the chat last time when I was on, and so I'm an atheist, and I have an objective standard for morality that has nothing to do with any God.
What kind of, if I could ask, what kind
Sure.
of atheist are you?
Oh, I believe God does not exist.
Okay, strong atheist.
Yeah.
Are you a materialist?
What do you mean by that?
You believe that the only thing that exists really is the universe, its physical characteristics and things like that?
I think that certainly all we have evidence for is the natural rule, if you want to call that materialist. Okay.
Okay, naturalism. Okay. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. So, you want me to just lay out the foundation for my objective standard?
Yeah, that'd be good.
Okay. Forgive me while I read it, but it was I thought it was the easiest way to keep focus on. So I think if you're going to build
Can I interrupt?
Absolutely.
What I'm going to do is mute myself. I have a speech recognition program, and I'll be talking into it. So if you see me talking, I'm repeating what you're saying into my program. not
Cool.
trying to be rude. So I'm going to
Okay.
mute myself, and that's what you'll be seeing me do.
Cool.
Go ahead.
Then I will not speak too quickly. If you're going to try to build a moral framework, I think you need to start with a foundation. The foundation I use is well-being. I define well-being as a reduction of suffering to the best of our ability, while at the same time trying to promote flourishing, again, to the best of our ability. My moral framework also involves the avoiding the involuntary imposition of will onto others who cannot or do not consent. The application of these also involves the veil of ignorance, as well as consequential ethics. One thing I do kind of sit on the fence about is that I'm not entirely convinced that morals are either objective or subjective. I think that there are good arguments for both, and I've heard good arguments for both. I am convinced that a thought cannot be moral or immoral, but that actions are either moral, immoral, or in some cases amoral. I'm also not convinced that there can't be a blending of both of these things. I think this is where amoral issues come in. I think there are times when, I do think that there are times when something is always wrong. For example, to take a page out of your book, I do believe it's always wrong to torture an innocent baby merely for one's own personal pleasure. I also think that there are things that are only sometimes wrong. And this is where the application of the above principles come in. That's it. You're still muted.
Yeah, I was yawning, and I have 3 big monitors with lots of stuff.
Cool. I subject myself to you.
Okay. There's lots of ways I can tackle this. I'll do the easy one first. Because you're a materialist, anything and everything you might offer is nothing more than chemical reactions in your brain. You can just say that they're objective standards, but doesn't mean that they are objective standards. It's just your chemical reactions. The necessity of materialism is that there is no supernatural thing, and that your soul and mind are property of the physical realm and the physical brain, so that when your physical brain ceases, therefore your mind ceases. Therefore, the mind is restricted to the laws of physics, chemistry, motion, matter of the physical brain. That means when I give you input, 2 + 2 = what? You'll say 4, hopefully. And it's just a chemical necessity. It doesn't mean that the value that you give is true. And so when you begin with the basis of your materialistic or naturalistic view, what that necessarily does is it casts doubt on your ability to justify rationality, from which you begin your whole argument. So I haven't gotten into the moral stuff yet, which I can do. How is it then that from your materialistic position that you can justify any idea that any chemical reaction that produces an answer to a question I might ask is true?
So I think it's interesting. One of the things that you just said was that because I exclude the supernatural. I exclude the supernatural only because there's no way, I mean, we don't even have a way to test for the supernatural, let alone confirm any supernatural causation. So I don't write it off just outright. I write it off because there's no way to even test. I mean, if you've developed a way to test the supernatural, that'd be super cool, and you're probably going to be famous. But we don't. We appear to be blocked from even having the capacity to do that. You also mentioned chemical reactions. Well, I mean, our brains produce chemical reactions and we come to thoughts. I justify the thoughts that I have based on my experiences with the world around me. We had mentioned before, I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but I really only, though I may have more and I still examine some from time to time, really only have 2 axioms that I operate from. And that is that reality is real and that my senses are reliable. And so it's whatever happens in the world, I interpret those through my senses, and I work on the axiom that reality is real. And that's how I make my way throughout the world. When it comes to whether or not I say anything and anything is true, I'm not really sure that makes any sense.
Okay. Yeah, I just had to, you exclude the supernatural because there's no way to test for it. That's a category error on your part.
Do you have a way to test the supernatural?
Let me finish. So if I were to say that I love my wife, is there a scientific method to test for that?
Yes, there absolutely is. There absolutely is.
Okay. And if I were to say that I'm loving her and compassionate, there is no scientific method. You see, science is the...
Yes, there is. You're incorrect.
Hold on, Michael. He didn't interrupt you at all.
Sure. Yeah, that's fine. I apologize.
And so, since science is a process of observation of the physical world, the material world, and then hypothesizing and then developing experiments to validate or invalidate the hypothesis, and then adjusting the experiments in order to arrive at a thesis or a hypothesis. That's the thing you'd have to develop if you have a way of testing, that I love my wife, because that's an internal thing. It's an experience and it's an abstraction. You said several things. So, if I tackle all these, the thing is that then you'll want to, say 15 more of those things. You made several statements. So if you don't mind, you can respond to what I just said. Then if you don't mind, and then I can tackle the next thing you said that I wrote down.
Sure. Yeah. So what you said about not being able to measure love is just factually incorrect. Are you familiar with a machine called an fMRI machine? Functional magnetic resonance imaging. That actually has the capacity to measure the impulses and reactions in our brain. And when we are shown objects on monitors, scientists can actually look at how our brain reacts to favorable things versus unfavorable things. We can be shown loved ones versus, like, maybe you have a neighbor that you don't like, and they show you a picture of your neighbor, they show you a picture of your wife, neighbor, wife, back and forth, and your brain will have reactions, and they can actually measure that. So I'm sorry, but what you said is just factually incorrect. We can't actually measure love.
What was the name of that again? Because
the functioning magnetic resonating machine.
Yeah, functional magnetic resonance imaging machine.
Can the machine differentiate between adoration and love?
Adoration and love, I'm not sure. But it does have the capacity to show the difference between positive and negative to the degree at which it can do it. I don't know. I'm not a scientist. I just play one on TV.
How about admiration? Differentiate between adoration and appreciation and love? Can it differentiate between them so they can tell which one it is when it's a chemical reaction?
I'm not sure.
So you don't know what it can do, and yet you've offered it as evidence that it can.
So what I said is it has the capacity to differentiate between negative and positive, right? So your neighbor that you don't like versus your wife that you do, you'd be able to see the positive and negative, and you would be able to deduce from those things that if you have a negative reaction about this neighbor that you don't like versus the positive reaction of your wife, and it's probably not that big a stretch to admit that you love your wife versus not loving your neighbor. I don't think it's that complicated.
Well, you said it can measure love. So if it's all hooked up to me and I'm thinking of my wife and I love her, and I'm thinking of my daughter who just recently released a drawing she did. She friggin' can't believe how good she is. See if I can find a picture of it. Just fantastic. At any rate, that's admiration. So if I'm thinking of my wife and I'm loving her, thinking of my daughter's drawing and I'm admiring it, and I'm going back and forth, periodically every few seconds, can the machine tell me which one is love and tell you which one's admiration?
So again, what I said was positive versus negative.
Okay,
not
so
positive versus positive.
So it cannot distinguish between admiration, adoration, appreciation, and love.
I'm personally not aware of that, but the illustration that I used was positive versus negative.
So you said it was scientifically testable to see that I love my wife. So the machine,
if you compare the two, you're obfuscating. If you compare the two, negative versus positive, right? So something that you clearly do have a positive feeling for versus something you do not have a positive feeling for, and the machine has the capacity to measure those things. So talking about your daughter versus your wife, the difference between admiration and adoration, you're trying to confuse the two.
No, I'm just working with what you said. You said there's a machine that can measure love.
Right.
And
What example did I give you?
You
Tell
said-
me the example I gave you.
You said between somebody you don't like and someone you do like, and they can test the difference.
Now everybody in the audience can see what it was that I said versus what you're trying to say I said.
And so if I don't like somebody versus I do like somebody, I like my neighbor, but I don't love my neighbor, can the machine tell any difference between that, positive and negative?
Again, what I said, positive versus negative, yes.
Okay, so if I'm liking my neighbor but not loving my neighbor, then it can differentiate?
Is one positive and one negative?
Oh, so any positive is what it differentiates. So it doesn't know if it's love, admiration, adoration, or anything. So then if that's the case, then your assertion fails.
Sure. And anybody in the audience can just look up an fMRI machine and we can just move past this.
Well, you just admitted, sure. Okay, so you admitted that it doesn't do what you said. Here's another thing you said. You justify the thoughts that you have based on your experience around the world. Are you
world
familiar?
around me, I think I said.
Yeah. And so have you experienced everything around the world to know what is the proper patterns of behavior normally in all situations and circumstances of all phenomena?
No, absolutely not.
Obviously not. So it's called the problem of induction, and that you see how the rock tumbles down the hill here, and it tumbles down 100 times that way. It's always going to tumble down that way. It's called the problem of induction. And I believe it was David Hume who destroyed that. It's not a very good way of determining truth. Are you familiar with that?
Yeah, but it's reasonable to infer that if it tumbles down one way, the next time it's reasonable to infer that it will tumble down the same way. And what I did say was, when we were talking about morality from a moral perspective, I said that I wasn't necessarily convinced that it was necessarily one way or the other. I think there are good arguments for both. I laid out my moral framework.
Okay. Well, we haven't tackled that yet.
So what does a rock have to do with it?
I was giving you an example of what the problem of induction is, where a certain behavior that you observe with your senses works a certain way. To conclude that it will always be that way is mere extrapolation, not proof. It's not a logical necessity.
I never said that it was proof.
Okay, but you're trying to tell me that you justify. That means to justify means to offer something logically valid of how you can interpret the world around you. So you do by your experience and your senses. Okay,
sure.
And so your experience and your senses are subjective, right?
Yeah, but they're testable.
So, but they're subjective based upon your experience. So if I were to, let's see, drop a baseball on your big toe, okay?
Sure.
From an exact height, and I dropped the exact same with no shoes, just on the same surface the whole bit.
Sure.
You and I both have our feet there, and I dropped the ball on my foot the exact same way in my big toe. Do we experience the same level of pain?
I'm not sure how I would interpret what you consider pain.
Okay. So then your experience is subjective to you, and you can't use it to impose any value on me, right?
Oh, no, sure, I could. And that's where I said that's where consequential ethics come in.
Okay. Excuse me. I hate to be rude. I know you're going to be very sympathetic and appreciative. I mean, I need to use the restroom.
Help yourself.
I've been drinking so much liquid trying to flush whatever it is out of me.
Help yourself.
I apologize, but give me a minute, okay?
Yeah.
Sure, absolutely. Help yourself.
Let me engage with you.
I hope you feel better.
Yeah. So let me engage with you here with a couple of things you said.
Sure.
Because you were saying you can measure.
Bring Justin in. Bring Justin in.
So you were saying that you can measure love, correct?
Yes.
Okay. But you can't differentiate between like and love in your example, correct?
No. What I said is I'm not sure to what degree the machine can.
Okay.
But there are lots of papers you can look this stuff up. It's pretty well documented.
Yeah, it's pretty well documented, but you're making absolute claims of something you're ignorant on yet again, right? And so I'm trying to say, you said this was an absolute fact. So if it's an absolute fact, but it can't differentiate, it can only differentiate from what you said between positive and negative.
So what I said was, sorry, go ahead.
You have to have a strong like and dislike, right? You can't have a like and a love, because that's not the positive and negative that you need, correct?
So my inability to discuss the absolute specifics of what the machine can and can't do is an evidence against or for Matt's position. And the difference is Matt made an absolute standard that it cannot be done.
Yeah, but
I demonstrated where he's wrong.
Well, see, it's special pleading on your part to say
it's absolutely not special pleading.
Oh, it actually is, because if you can't differentiate between like and love, then you're not being able to measure love. You're just measuring strong emotions, positive or negative. If that's all the machine could do, then it can't differentiate, and that's what Matt was saying.
Well,
I think you're not understanding what special pleading is. Special pleading is when you apply one standard to one thing, but then exclude that same standard from something else. That's not at all what I did.
Which is exactly what you did.
I disagree. Sorry, Justin, go ahead.
Well, and think about it. What he's trying to explain to you on a special pleading is the fact that just a few minutes ago, I saw an angel fly over my head. Disprove it. I'm using the same argument because you're saying I've got a machine that can prove all this, and now that I've said it, that proves it. Well, I just said I saw an angel fly over my head. That proves it. See, that's special pleading. That is special.
What I did is I said that there's a machine, and then what I said is this is something that anybody can find out. There's Google's a wonderful thing, and you can find out that what I said is true. And my inability to explain it with the finesse that a Google paper can isn't evidence for what I said is wrong. It's evidence of my inability to explain it correctly.
And we're going to get back to Matt, but I just want to point out for the audience, because it's the third time that Michael's been on. You guys notice the consistent pattern. He makes absolute claims, and then when pressed to actually have to give an answer, he pleads ignorance. And therefore, it's a form of a Dillhunty dodge. To just a crafty one, I'll admit, much better, I think, than Dillhunty's, but it's still the same principle. It's avoid having to actually defend any claims that you make, even when you say they're absolute. Well, if they're absolute, but they can't distinguish between like and love, it's not absolute proof that there's a way to measure love. There's only absolute to measure a very strong positive versus negative. If that's all it does, then that's not proof.
So is gravity an absolute fact?
Where?
On Earth, like the gravity we experience.
The law of gravity is in effect on Earth.
Well, it's actually gravitational theory. It's actually theories contain laws, not the other way around. But your inability or my inability to explain all the intricacies of it doesn't make it any less true. And I'd like the audience to take note of that.
Well, the thing is, I'm saying that gravity exists because we can measure that, and we have laws, and we use the science. When we take your thing, which you had said everything could be falsifiable, Matt just showed that your claim of absoluteness was false because it couldn't measure between like and love. That falsified the argument. So it can be measured. Give me an example. Well, we'll do this after because I'm going to go back to Matt. But you an example where you can falsify gravity, and we'll get back to that later.
Sorry, I'm just in the middle of.
Sorry about that. Thanks for the politeness you offered me to be able to use the restroom.
Oh, hopefully you feel better.
It's starting to feel a little bit better. For those who don't know, came in late. Got a really upset stomach, and I was dry heaving a little bit, and so I drink a lot of water to flush it through. So I may have to use the restroom again.
What'd you eat?
I had some chili, just some basic chili and some crackers and some stuff. But, sometimes.
The question you should have asked, Michael, is, did Matt cook it?
That's another topic altogether. I just nuked it. Okay, so if we can get back, can I ask you more?
Get to Matt.
You can ask me anything.
You were supposed to get to what happened in a store recently.
Yeah, well, let me continue with this. Then later on, we can talk about that, how I got out slicked by somebody. Yeah, it's another story. So you say you have two axioms to operate on, that reality is real and senses are reliable.
Yeah, and the reality. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. But the reality is that something that I'm constantly asking myself whether or not I have more than that. But whenever I go down that road, I always kind of end up with those two. I may have others maybe that I'm not even aware of that I employ and that I do unconsciously.
That's usually the case. We usually have things hiding, lurking in the shadows that we discover later on about ourselves. So that means that you assume the reliability. I won't get into the issue of reality, but you assume the reliability of your senses.
Not necessarily just assume, because they can be tested, right? Like we can use other people. So like if I say that I see, if I'm seeing spots or I'm seeing stars or something like that, looking at a wall, I can say, like, are you seeing this or am I seeing something? So I can use other people to help to verify whether or not what I'm seeing is real. Or did you hear that? No, I didn't hear that. Or maybe I'm hearing something, or something like that. So we can so it's probably fair to say that to a certain extent that I presuppose that they're reliable. But there are other times if I'm not by myself, then I can get the help of somebody else in the environment to see whether or not it is reliable in that instance, whatever, like the example I gave.
Okay, then let me run off of that. So I'm typing out what you're saying as you say it, and if I misrepresent you, my apologies. Never trying to do that. You said you don't necessarily assume that your senses are always accurate and reliable. It seems to be, I mean, you otherwise couldn't drive a car. But okay, so because my phone just made a weird sound. Because you can't necessarily assume the accuracy and therefore the reliability of your senses in all areas. And that your experiences, of course, are subjective and your interpretations are subjective. How do you, from that, establish the universal truth that morality is based upon reduction of harm?
Well, because my foundation is well-being.
Why is that foundation the right one?
I'm not asserting that it is the right one, but it's the foundation that I start with. And that's why I said before that I'm not necessarily convinced that it's objective or subjective. And like I said, when I read my little blurb, that there are good arguments on both sides. But if you start from starting from a foundation of well-being and the other principles that I listed, I can morally assess situations to come back to that standard of well-being.
Okay, so the well-being is something that you say you just begin with because it's based upon your whatever criteria that is related to you.
Well, no, not just me, other people. Like I would say the same thing for like if you and I were standing in the same room and something was to happen, then I would consider my well-being and I would also consider your well-being. If I had to take action against you in a positive or negative way, given this imaginary thing that just happened, I would gauge my well-being and your well-being, and I would use that well-being as a standard. So the part of the ceiling collapses, okay? And I like this is far-fetched, and I use it only as an example. Part of the ceiling starts to collapse. Well, in a situation where the ceiling wasn't collapsing, pushing you out of the way would be counter to your well-being. I could cause you physical harm. Maybe you had a shoulder injury and I push you on the shoulder and I hurt you in some way. But with the ceiling collapsing, pushing you out of the way is much better from the perspective of your well-being versus a hunk of ceiling falling on your head.
So why is reducing harm the right moral standard to base it all on?
Wouldn't you agree that harm reduction is a good thing?
Not necessarily. I'm asking you what justifies saying that well-being is the right moral standard, not only for yourself, but for others.
If you don't think well-being is good, I don't know what to say to you.
I didn't say it was good. I didn't say it wasn't good. I just asked you about your position. See,
Do you see
goodness,
well-being as a good thing?
it depends on the circumstances, the necessities, what's going on. Well-being has a variety of meanings.
Can you give me an example of when well-being isn't the best thing?
Yeah, when you have a broken arm and you're taking a drug to mask the broken arm, and so you have a feeling and sensation of well-being, but that's not a good thing for you because you need to have that injury addressed.
But that still addresses your well-being, a reduction of pain and suffering.
Mm,
That's still
Yeah,
that's still better than suffering.
Yeah, Michael, he was asking you a question that defended by trying to flip the burden of proof. You need
I'm honestly trying to explain. Like, I mean, so I start from a standard of well-being. So you said that if I had a broken arm, I had to take drugs. Well, taking the drugs would still be a promotion of well-being because it would be a reduction of suffering.
So the reduction of the suffering, if I were to find different circumstances and situations, and where a person's a drug addict and just takes drugs to make themselves feel good,
Mm-hmm.
and even though they are hurting themselves severely in the process, but they're feeling better, would you say that's a good thing?
No, because so the specific example that you used is taking drug, and I'm assuming you're referring to like illicit drugs like coke or meth or something. Like, am I right?
Just a drug.
Okay, so is this person abusing the drugs, or are they taking it for are they taking it for a reason, or maybe did they start to take it and then get hooked on it and now they're abusing it? Because these have factors. These are factors that make a determination in the well-being. Because if the person, again, if the person has to take these drugs for a longer period of time because of a larger sustained injury, then maybe they're taking that drugs and maybe feeling better as the byproduct, and that could be addressing their well-being in a positive way. But if they've been taking the drugs for, let's say, they injured themselves and the doctor gave them a prescription for, I don't know, 2 weeks, right? And the prescription has expired. This prescription is done. They've taken the medication. They feel better, but they still like the way the drugs made them feel. And maybe they get a fake prescription, or they buy pills, the same pills off the street or something, who knows? That would be counter their well-being. And that's measurable, because if let's say it's an opioid, right? And it's causing damage to their liver or to another part of their body, or it's making them so they can't work and then they lose their job and all these things. So these are tangible ways that they'll have a negative effect on the person's overall well-being. And in that way, it's causing harm. And so them not taking the pills would be a reduction in harm, which would increase their well-being.
So the issue of well-being is subjective, or subject to the circumstances, motives, on whether or not well-being at that point, as you've defined it, is a proper standard or not, right?
Oh no, I don't. I think well-being as a standard is objective.
Can you define what well-being means?
I don't know that anyone's ever asked me what well-being is. So I think I think in some ways it's self-explanatory. I think, and this may sound mumbled or jumbled, but I'm just kind of having to piece it together on the fly. I would say well-being is anything that encompasses some of the things that I said, right? A reduction in harm to the best of our ability, an increase in flourishing, something that is that will promote health, life, things like that.
So well-being is a reduction of harm?
I think they go hand in hand. Yeah.
So is reduction of harm well-being?
Like I said, I think they go hand in hand.
Do you see the circularity of your definition?
Yeah, it's virtuously circular.
Yeah, it's just what's good. Well, that which makes me feel right. Well, what's make you feel right? That's what good is. So
well, no, because I said, and I hope you're not trying to purposely twist things around, is I said that it very much depends on what it's about, like to try to get to a basis of that standard of well-being, right?
What I was doing was asking you the definition of well-being. Your definition is tautologous. You define well-being as a reduction of harm. When I ask you if reduction of harm is what well-being is, you say yes. So I think they are part of one another. So your definition is just nothing more than a circle.
If I could Google search well-being if you really wanted, a more strict definition. But if you're asking me for what, if you're asking me for what my definition is, I'm telling you that I think that they go hand in hand. I think that reduction of harm, the increase in flourishing and well-being all tie together and go hand in hand. If you want a more concise definition, use Google.
Well, I'm debating you, not Google, and so I was asking you if you
Is what I'm saying unclear to you? Because it's pretty clear to me.
If you're the one saying well-being is what is the proper standard, and I ask you what that is, and you're not sure what it is, that doesn't bode well for your ability to defend your position.
I'm defending my position just fine. I've told you what it is. So is my explanation of well-being unclear to you?
Oh, it's clear. That's why I was able to raise the objection to what your definition brings, because you're saying well-being is a reduction of harm. And I asked you if reduction of harm is well-being. You said yes. So I'm just trying to point out that what you're doing is you're defining something and then saying the definition is what it is. You're not establishing that your position is the correct one. You're just saying—
I never said it was correct.
You're just saying
you asked me that before.
Okay, so
and I didn't tell you that it was correct.
here's the thing.
I need to use the restroom again. Sorry, I drink a lot of liquid that flows through.
I know you'll still be able to listen, or may not have to take that off. So here's the thing. I'm going to leave this comment up from Joanne. She said, I wish Matt could get a word in without being interrupted. The interesting thing with that, Michael, is I was able to predict, and clearly accurately, that you would be more aggressive tonight with Matt. It's a tactic. I saw you got more aggressive with Anthony and even more with Matt. So I'm curious, is it because you getting aggressive with me is not going to work because I don't get rattled. I stay even keeled, and you're trying to get under Matt's skin so it looks like you've actually won when you're actually floundering because you're—
No, absolutely not. No, absolutely not. And geez, this is gonna come across harsh. I don't get aggressive with you, and I don't get aggressive with Justin. I think maybe it's because our personalities mesh together a little bit better. And I'm not blowing sunshine. I don't do that, and I won't use the expletives that I would normally use. But because I just, that's not what I do. With Matt, I have no problem. I'll say this to his face when he comes back. His reputation precedes him, and so there is a little bit going on there. I freely admit that. But there also seems to be, and this is why when I said before, like when after the first time that we were on, after the first time that I was on, and everybody pushed stop and it was just Justin and I talking, we had such an amazing conversation for about 45 minutes, and it was free flowing, and there was a really no, and there was but you would agree with me, I believe wholeheartely, that it was very free flowing, and it was what's the best word?
Well, the thing that's going to be neat when I get to talk to this pastor again, because you just said exactly, almost word for word, what I told him, that you'd be more aggressive with Matt.
Oh, it's entirely possible. Yeah, and I admit it freely. I admit it freely. So, right. so just to avoid any more obfuscation, I'm going to adopt this definition of well-being. Well-being is the experience of health, happiness, and prosperity that includes having good mental health, high life satisfaction, a sense of meaning and purpose, and the ability to manage stress. More generally, well-being is just feeling well, and that's it. So I agree with that definition. So let's move on from there.
Okay, so that's the definition you choose.
Sure.
And and if I were to ask you again, just to reiterate, is that you're saying ultimately it's reduction of harm, the increase of well-being, or prosperity, wealth, whatever, feeling good, and that is by definition what you have well-being. Now, the point I'm trying to make is that it's a circular argument. Now hold on, let me explain something. It's circular. Now, what you could do is come back and say, well, Matt, what do you say real well-being is? And I would say well-being is that which conforms to the intent of God for us. And then you'd say, well, how do you know that's true? And I'd say, well, I assume the validity of the Christian worldview. And you'd say, well, that's an assumption. I say, yeah, and there's a point of circularity there. We all have to do this. The question then comes down to, can your worldview account and justify your circularity, or can mine? See, mine excludes yours, so they cannot both have to be able to do that if they both mutually exclude each other's worldviews as being viable, necessary preconditions to justify the reasoning that we have in the issues of our discussion, particularly here on the issue of reducing harm as an objective means. Now, you said it's an objective means. Objective means it's not subjective. It's not subjected to your personal preferences, your desires, or your wants. It's something else out there. Now, the objective standard, now this might be a tricky question for you. Where does that objective standard reside? And if it's unclear, I can explain more.
Where does it reside? Like, are you asking if it's transcendent?
Yeah, is it a transcendent objective you have, or is it found under rocks, or is it by vote from your neighbors?
I'm not sure if my neighbors vote. Sorry, couldn't resist that. So is my standard transcendent in some way, or is it part of me? I think you are probably responsible for me thinking about the word transcendent more than anybody else, and I mean that as a compliment, because I like to challenge myself and think about things.
Well, I am slick, so thank you.
So I do think about transcendent a lot, and it's not something that it's not something I deliberately try to shy away from. But but honestly, my brain gets stuck on it when I think about it sometimes. But I think if I'm trying to be 100% honest with you and answer your question honestly, I would have to say that I believe, the reason I believe my standard is objective is because when I apply it, it works. And what I mean by that is that I can apply, and this is why I tried to get, when I was asking you, do you believe that well-being is good? Because I think if anybody honestly, and even if we put God aside for a moment, if we just kind of like just move that aside for just a second and just think about well-being, I would really have a hard time believing, and I think I would almost go as far as to say I would think that someone is not being honest if they said that. And I know you'd say you can't lie. So I would think that someone is being dishonest if they say they can't look at well-being and say that well-being and the attempt to get to well-being is a good thing. So I think, and that's why I'm not 100% sure that I've answered your question. I am trying, though.
It's okay. I'll help you. I'll help you out by making it more difficult. Okay.
Cool.
All right.
Thanks so much for that.
Sure. Morality is an abstraction. It occurs in the mind and the heart. This awareness part of us. You and I could go through a thrift shop together looking for morals, and we could ask the shop owner, "You got any morals laying around?" "Oh yeah, over here in this drawer." It's an old, it's not going to happen. These things are abstractions, and we're talking about them. So if I were to say it's wrong to murder, not justifying it, just saying wrong to murder, you agree, then we are agreeing to a moral standard, and we're agreeing to an abstraction, something that occurs in the mind and the heart, right?
Yeah, and I would say that I also agree that it is wrong to murder.
Okay, good. So you agrees that it is an abstraction. All right. So where does this abstraction that we both apprehend, where does it reside?
I don't know.
Okay. So you would admit it's an abstraction, and since I've got you to think about transcendence, let's talk about this some more then. It is, okay, I'm going to say a statement. It is morally wrong to murder, all right, and you already agree.
Yes, so, I agree that is wrong.
Now, it's not wrong because I said so. Would you agree? Just merely me saying it, merely me, Matt Slick saying it, doesn't make it right or wrong.
Oh, no, merely anyone saying it, I would 100% agree with you. What I would do is sorry, you finish your thing first, then I'll go back. Sorry.
Okay, well, thank you. Appreciate that. So then it's not an issue of who says it, what you or me. Mm-hmm. We recognize a transcendent abstraction that we're both apprehending.
Yep.
how do you account for this transcendent abstraction in your atheistic materialistic worldview?
Well, so yeah, see, and this is one thing that you do that I don't like, because atheism is an answer to a single question. So we have to put that aside for just a second, because my lack of a belief, or actually the belief that your God doesn't exist, doesn't impact my morals at all. In fact, I think I am morally superior to the God you think is real. But I look at it, and what I do is I say, okay, well, it goes back to well-being, and I accept and I admit that I cannot. I don't even know. I'd have to do a lot of thinking about how I would ground that. But as I go through the thought process, I keep coming back to, well, the reason I believe it is wrong to murder someone is because it would be directly counter to their well-being. That's why I believe it's wrong to kill someone. Oh, sorry, murder someone.
Well, that's not the issue, what you believe. The issue here is the transcendent nature of the moral that you and I both apprehend.
Yeah, so at the end of the day, I don't know where it comes from.
Okay.
I don't know where it comes from.
So you admit that there's a transcendent abstraction that we apprehend, that we both agree is valid and true. Thou shalt not murder, right? Murder is wrong. So
yeah,
you do that.
I think we each ground it in something differently, though. Yeah.
Well, I would ground it, an abstraction, in a mind. Abstractions require minds. You can't have an abstraction. Here's my water glass. I've been sipping a lot, and I'm starting to feel better. I'm going to have to use the restroom again. I do apologize for that.
I'm glad you're feeling better.
Impoliteness, but we don't look for the abstraction inside this glass, and then I, put in a freezer and freeze it and say, "Hey, come over and look at the abstraction of thou shalt not murder." You've already admitted to a materialistic worldview. You've admitted to the transcendent nature of the moral statement, the moral truth that murder is wrong. You've admitted that it's an abstraction, that it's a transcendent one. Now, you have an atheistic worldview. Yes. So what we're having here is a conflict of worldviews. Your worldview excludes mine from being valid. My worldview excludes yours from being valid.
I don't 100% agree with that, but go on, finish your point, and then we'll go back to it.
Okay, because my worldview says there is a God to whom we answer, who's a source of things. And you would say, no, that's not the case, because you're a strong atheist. You openly deny it. So both our worldviews, where you deny God's existence and I affirm God's existence as the necessary framework from which we argue, both cannot be true because they're both mutually exclusive, correct?
Oh, sure. I agree with that 100%.
Okay. If we have two views that are mutually exclusive, God and no God, there is no third option, correct?
So you're going for the disjunctive syllogism here?
Yes. So there's no third option, correct?
If there is no third option, sure.
So it's either the case that God is a necessary preconditions, or it's not the case that God's a necessary precondition. That's a true dichotomy, correct?
Sure.
So if we negate one, the other one by necessity is validated, correct?
Yeah, but the problem that you have here is if one is validated.
I said invalidated.
Right. So if one is invalidated, then but the problem is that, and this is where, so I just want to take a second and go back before I lose this thought. You had said that there's an abstraction. You think that an abstraction has to be grounded in a mind. Is that is what you said, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. Why can't the abstraction be grounded in our minds?
Because the abstraction is universal and absolute.
Right.
And if it's grounded in our minds, then our minds would be the source of something universal and absolute, and that would be the implication of the divine mind, which you deny. So that can't work.
No, second, I don't. That's a non sequitur. It doesn't necessarily follow that it has to be a divine mind, because, and we never actually spoke about this, but it is my belief and my understanding that morality is an emergent property. So why can't it be an emergent property that is now grounded in our? Why can't it be grounded in our minds? Because to say it has to be grounded in an internal mind, that's a non sequitur. Because you're also appealing to something that you haven't. I don't know, Andrew's going to jump on this, but you're about to appeal to something that you haven't been able to demonstrate.
So let's do a thought experiment with what you just said and test it logically. So you say morality is an emergent property of minds.
That's what I believe. Yeah.
Okay, so let's say there's only two minds in the universe, you and me.
Okay.
And you say murder is right. I say murder is wrong. Doesn't matter who says what. So say A is not B or B is not whatever. Doesn't matter. How do we determine which one is correct?
We go back to the foundation of well-being.
Okay, so wait, you don't understand.
Oh no, I completely understand. And if you say murder, if one of us says murder's right, and one of us says murder's wrong, then all we have to do is go back to the standard of well-being, and we can determine that the person who said murder is right is incorrect because murder goes against the well-being of that creature.
So the two minds that exist, and then you say the standard is well-being, and I say no, it's not. Who's correct?
Well, because well-being is we can demonstrate what well-being is. Because if the person is, let's say, so we're having this theoretical argument, right, where it's just you and me, in the universe, and you believe that murder is wrong.
Let's just say I believe well-being is not the proper standard of morality, and you do.
Right. So if I start to, so then you would have to start to harm me in that case because you believe that well-being isn't the standard. So you start to harm me, and you would be able to see that my well-being is affected. And if you in fact killed me, it would then be demonstrated true that my well-being was negatively affected because I would not be alive anymore.
If you say that morality is a product of minds, and there's two minds, right, which mind is producing the proper moral absolute?
Well, we go back to the standard of well-being.
Which mind is producing the proper standard that by which you can say well-being is the right standard? How do you know? The two minds disagree. You say well-being is correct. I say well-being is not the correct standard.
Right.
Which one's right?
So that's when we move on to, like I said, to demonstrate. Like it's demonstrable. If one of us harmed the other, then that would be a demonstration of the reduction of well-being, which would validate the other person's position. No, it's not begging the question at all.
Let me explain.
It's a clear demonstration.
What you're doing is saying that the reason it's wrong is because it occurs. So if I hurt you, which I would never do, if I hurt you, you say, see, there I go, I'm right. No, that's called begging the question. You're just assuming your position's true. You're not demonstrating it is. You're stuck.
If you hurt me,
well-being issue.
Right. Then my well-being wouldn't be affected?
I didn't say it would or would not be affected. I said
if you hurt me, would my well-being be affected?
Certainly it's affected.
Right. And that demonstrates the point.
Is the effect morally right or morally wrong?
It would be morally wrong because it negatively affects my well-being.
So how do you know that negatively affecting your well-being is the right standard?
Because it negatively affects well-being, which goes against the definition I gave you for well-being.
So then there you're back to the circularity of your reasoning. You're just saying it's your particular subjective opinion that is the right standard, and I disagree with you. So which one of us is correct?
And like I said, so I'm even prepared to accept that it's circular. I don't even have a problem with it being circular because it's still demonstrably accurate.
No, it's a moral issue, not a demonstration. Like how many times does the ball bounce down the stairs? The issue is how do you know what is a moral right and wrong from your subjective preferences?
It's morally right if it doesn't negatively impact my well-being. It is morally right, or pardon me, if it's morally wrong if it does negatively impact my well-being. I don't see this as being that difficult.
Oh, it is difficult for you. You just don't see it because you're an atheist. No offense meant, but because your worldview doesn't allow you to see the problem of your own position. I have to go over it and over and over it again. You're begging the question. You're committing a logical fallacy. Furthermore, you're using logic, which you cannot account for in your worldview, but that's another topic for a little bit later. After my next bathroom break, I got so much water I drink. It's working to flush me out.
Good.
Sorry about that.
It's fine.
So you're just saying that that well-being is the right standard, and you say, how do we know it's the right standard? Because if I hurt somebody, that's what well-being is not. So therefore, that's why it's the right one.
Sure.
It doesn't present it as being correct, especially since you earlier said that morality is a transcendent abstraction.
Is well-being better than not well-being?
how can a universal moral abstraction, which is not dependent upon your subjective preferences, be not subjective and subjective to your personal preferences at the same time? And it's subjective because you're defining well-being based on your desire that well-being be the right standard. It's purely subjective. But earlier you said that the transcendent nature of the abstraction is not subjective, it has to be objective. So what you're doing is you are contradicting yourself. Think about that while my deepest apologies. I have to use the restroom again.
Nature calls. I understand.
I drank a lot of liquid to get me through this.
That's so real quick. Just one of the things you said, that suffering is to be avoided, right?
Yes, I believe. Well, I think from it, if we're talking about an objective moral standard, less suffering is good.
Okay, and yet suffering is often the very thing that grows us to be better, which is well-being. For example, if you don't struggle in school, you're not going to study. If you have to struggle, you're going to study harder. And this is a real world case. I talked to a guy. He thought God doesn't exist because he prayed that God would take care of he had a learning disability. He had to work harder than everyone else in school. So his suffering was that he had to work harder. He was lacking in the ability to learn like other people. However, because he had to study harder and work harder, and when he got a job, he couldn't go and play. He had to work to be able to do what other people could do. He's now the vice president, or was at the time that I met him, the vice president of the company. Well, that's was super cool. Well-being, but it's suffering. The very suffering you want to avoid is the thing that's going to grow in the well-being. So you therefore can't say that avoiding suffering produces well-being, because sometimes the suffering is what will produce the well-being.
No, so I was very careful in the beginning when I said it was reducing suffering to the best of our ability, and this is the same reason why we vaccinate our kids, right? So we vaccinate our kids, even though we understand that there's going to be a little bit of pain involved. We understand that the greater good is being served through the vaccination, and there is a demonstrable increase in well-being as a result.
Okay, so we're going to get Matt back in. Before we do, folks, watch again. Listen to the language he uses. He'll say things are demonstrable, actually true, the overwhelming evidence. Yep. But whenever pressured, just goes, I don't know.
You can just go to CDC. You can just go to CDC's website and look up the advocacy of vaccines.
Because they're always right.
They never lie, right? I mean, coronavirus is on surfaces, or it's not on surfaces. Yeah. Matt, I think you got to pull your mic down. You have it up over. There you go.
Thank you. Let's just get back on track. Oh, yeah. Sorry about that. I apologize.
No worries at all. I do forget exactly what we were talking about, though.
Well, I have my notes.
Okay.
We're discussing the transcendent nature. I asked you, where does the moral truth that murder is wrong, where does it reside? Right. Because it's a transcendent abstraction, which you've already agreed to.
Right. So I think it's an abstraction that resides within us, and because I think that morals are an emergent property, I think that it resides within us.
Maybe you're not aware of what transcendence means.
Well, no. You said abstraction, right?
Yeah, the abstraction is transcendent. You agreed.
Yeah, I think it resides. I think it resides within us, right? And an abstraction, right? Because would you agree that a thought is a part of our mind, or not a part of our mind?
A thought is a part of our mind.
Do you think our thoughts can be transcendent?
No. We have to define transcendent now at this point, because we're having a problem here. So transcendence is that which exists and is not dependent upon space and time for its validity. Okay, you can agree or don't agree.
So is a thought reliant on space and time?
Yeah, it relies on my mind, my brain. Yeah.
Okay.
So generally speaking, that which is transcendent, because you said you appreciate what I do, you'll know my transcendent argument for God's existence, the issue of transcendence.
Tag. Sure, yeah. Okay.
and that the nature and the laws of logic, and laws of logic are statements, morality are statements too. It is wrong to murder. These are abstractions. They have transcendent value, and the reason we know they have transcendent value is because they apply to you and me.
Well, hang on. Just sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you there, but they have transcendent value, or they are transcendent themselves.
Yeah, that's a good clarification. They have transcendence in their nature. In that they are not dependent upon your mind or my mind for their validity.
Okay, and so murdering someone is wrong would fit that, because you don't think, because you believe that it's wrong to murder someone, and I believe it's wrong to murder someone, independent of our own individual thoughts.
Well, the better example came to is if there are only two minds in the universe. This will make it a little easier.
Well, we went down this route before with the other thing, right?
Yes, and in this is an example in that you say reduction of harm. What I know you're meaning is the overall reduction of harm. I know the argument.
Sure,
sometimes you got to break an arm to heal to fix it. I get that. I'm not going to do minutia. So the overall reduction of harm is basically what you call good, and that it is a standard. Would you say it's a transcendent standard?
Based on your definition of transcendent, I'm not sure, but I do agree with what you said about it being an abstraction, like being a part of the mind. I do accept that, but based on your definition of transcendent, I'm not sure.
So well-being is reducing harm. Is that universally applicable?
I believe it is, yes.
So if it's universally applicable, ought all people accept it as being true?
Sorry, can you repeat that? You beeped out for a second.
Sure. If well-being is reducing harm and it is universally applicable,
I believe so.
Right, then, let me write this down, applicable, then ought all people adhere to it?
Yes, I believe they should.
Okay. So what you're now saying is that reducing harm, okay? The reduction of harm as a standard of well-being. Okay, I'll just summarize that in your well-being definition. Okay.
Sure. Yeah.
Your well-being criteria, whatever. Your well-being position. I'll say that. Your
Sure.
well-being position is now universally applicable, which means that all people are morally obligated to follow it.
I believe so. Yes.
Okay.
And I think, again, going back to that standard of what well-being is. Yeah, I believe people should follow that. Does that mean they will? No, probably not. In fact, probably not even probably, demonstrably not. People don't do it. People don't do it all the time.
Without begging the question, okay, which is just you assume the position to be true. Give me a logical reason why all people ought to adhere to your definition of morality being based on well-being.
So I think that they should. And the reason that I think that they should is, again, because if you're, and this is what I said at the beginning, if you have to start with a foundation, and this is where, if from a realistic perspective, and I was talking about my wife with this before, we chat about this stuff a lot. Morality is sticky. It's tricky. And as I said before, like in the little opening, I'm not 100% convinced that it is either objective or subjective. Good arguments for both. And I think that in some ways they may be able to cohabitate, for lack of a better term. So I'm not sure that I can tell you why without going back to my foundation, because my foundation is why I think they should in the first place.
You haven't justified or grounded the reason. So you said that people should universally comply to your definition of what reducing harm is. So you're the one who's come up with this. You're the one who's stating it. And now you're saying that everybody everywhere ought to subject themselves to your moral requirement.
No, not to my moral requirement. And that's a little tricky where you're trying to say, well, no, it's all about you. You're saying all this stuff. You're saying all this stuff. Well, we're having a discussion, and I said that this is what I believe, and things like that. And I told you that I didn't think it was necessarily objective or subjective, and that there were arguments for both on both sides. And you asked me the question, and I understand that it's a leading question, and I I answered your question as honestly as I could, given the principle of charity and hoping to move forward in a, in an amicable way. But what you're trying to do is you're trying to trap me into a question saying, well, why should everybody do what you want? Which is not what I believe. So if we have to peel this back and start from the foundation, let's try to move forward with this like in an honest way. I'm not saying everybody should do what I do. I'm saying that if you start from a standard of well-being, then if people were to follow that, I think generally speaking, if people followed this, I think we would see less harm and suffering. Should people do it? From my subjective opinion, yeah, maybe the world would be better off. I don't know.
So you're coming apart at the seams. You said that the issue of the morality, the reduction issue, was universally applicable and that people ought to adhere to it. I wrote it down. You said they should. And you can certainly say, let me adjust that. I'm going to retract that.
Which is what I did.
Okay. And then I'm glad you did, because you can't defend that from your atheistic position. You can't defend a transcendent moral absolute. So then that's good. I exposed that. So now what you're doing is saying it's subjective, and you think in your subjective opinion they ought to. Well, let me say something about your opinion, and it's going to sound a little rude, but I don't mean it to be rude. But who gives a flying rip what your opinion is? Not to be disrespectful to you. I'm sure we'd get along if we went out and had a beer together, something like that.
I don't drink.
But coffee?
No, I don't drink coffee either.
Tea?
Nope.
Kombucha? Water's a gimme. He has to have water. That's too easy.
Yeah. No, well, you would call it soda. I drink pop.
Okay, soda.
Yeah.
So, soda. Then I'm sure we get along drinking soda. I like RC Cola better than Coca-Cola myself. We could argue about that, the subjective merits of it and why we ought to all drink RC. So the problem is that what you're doing is, and I think it's good, you're having to redefine your position when it's cross-examined. But the problem is that it's leading more to your subjectivity. The more it leads to your subjective preferences, the less applicable your definition is universally, which is a self-defeater for you. If you're to say that it's okay. If you're to say that a subjective preference is what you have about people, you believe subjectively that they should do this, well, it's just your opinion. And there's no obligation for this, and then there goes your objective standard that you said you have. Oh
no, so I understand why you think that way, and you think that way based on your theistic worldview.
I'm just using your information.
I let you finish. So what I'm saying is that if we from my atheistic worldview, I can set forth, and I did, and all of the questioning and everything else like that doesn't really matter. If we start from a foundation of well-being, then we can establish morality. I can establish a morality, and I don't need a God to do it.
Why is well-being the right standard to start with?
Do you not think that well-being is better than not well-being?
That's subjective. You're asking me a subjective preference. What is
sure?
Better?
What do you think? What do you think?
I think that generally speaking, well-being is better than not well-being because
well, we agree.
Because of the revelation of God, you being made in the image of God, and me having the obligation to be able to treat you properly. And so that is how I can ground it. I'm asking you, and that's why I would say from that perspective, not that that's the only one, but I will have to, because you're made in the image of God, even though you deny him who made you, I would still treat you with respect. If you dropped your wallet, I'm still going to return it to you. If you insult me and take a swing at me and I duck and just run and drop your wallet, I'm still going to return it to you because you're made in the image of God. And I can ground my morality in him. But your grounding of morality is in your subjective experience. I asked you, why is well-being the right standard to begin with? And you say, then you ask me a question. Well, right. Don't you agree that well-being is good? Right. Well, yeah, but the reason I do is different than your reason. I grounded in God. Why is the well-being from your atheistic perspective? That's what the whole thing is.
Mm.
Why is that the right standard to begin with when you don't have a transcendent being by which you can ground anything?
No, I think that well-being is self-grounding.
I think well-being is not self-grounding.
Okay. So without begging the question, can you justify your belief that well-being is not self-grounding?
Can you stop?
Andrew, I get a train of thought going. I need to continue in that train of thought. Can I justify that my well-being? I'm sorry, what was your question? I'm sorry.
Without begging the question, can you justify your basis of well-being?
What do you mean by begging the question? Assuming God's existence?
Yes.
Without doing that? No, I can't.
Okay. So you're doing the same thing I am, I guess.
You mean not being able to ground something without God? I agree.
No, what I'm saying is that you would want to say that I'm begging the question and assuming that in my response, and I'm telling that you're doing the exact same thing. What I'm doing is I'm removing this unnecessary thing. I don't need a God to be moral.
I said it earlier that we both beg the question. Maybe you missed that. It was early on. We both do that. The issue is which worldview can justify begging the question. If I assume the Christian God exists, then everything makes sense. If you deny the Christian
absolutely.
God,
if you presuppose it all exists, then yeah, you're done. It is the catch-all. It is the duct tape for every problem. If you just assume that this thing is real, sure, no problem. I don't make that assumption because it's an unjustified assumption. I just don't make that assumption.
I was going to say that if I were to presuppose the existence of the Christian Trinitarian God, everything makes sense and I can justify my morality, rationality, our existence. If, on the other hand, if you deny the Christian God exists, you cannot justify any objective morality or objective rationality or our existence. Your worldview. No, you did not. What you did, let me correct you. What you did was you said in your subjective experience, you used your subjective experience, interpretive methods around the world in order to be able to determine what is true and what is false, what is right, what is wrong. By definition, that's subjective from the very beginning. You then said that there are morals that are transcendent abstractions. But transcendent abstractions are not dependent upon you, otherwise not transcendent. They would be subjective. Transcendent abstractions are objective. So what you're doing is you're contradicting yourself, but you don't realize you're contradicting yourself. You're saying that your subjective experiences and interpretations justify a transcendent objectivity, but you don't have that ability in your naturalistic, materialistic worldview, which is reduced to chemical reactions in your brain. Your worldview undermines your rationality. Your worldview does not justify any objective moral standard. Your worldview is a subjective experience that you have that's reduced only to your preferences and your ideas and your wants and desires. I'm not mocking you and making fun of you. I'm just analyzing a position and showing that it's weak. When we presuppose certain things, and everybody does, when we presuppose things, we develop a paradigm. Then we have evidence, facts, phenomena. Does it fit within that paradigm? Does the paradigm make these things work together? And okay, if one does not make it work together, abandon the paradigm. If it does, you can continue with the paradigm. Maybe it'll become falsified later on, but at least if something is shown to be falsified, you should abandon it. Your atheistic worldview is based on materialism, falsifies itself because you cannot trust your chemical reactions in your brain to be producing proper logical inference or moral awareness or absolutes. You also cannot demonstrate from the, as you've already said, which is a contradiction of your materialism, that there's a transcendent abstraction out there. How do you get a transcendent abstraction, since abstractions require mind, but there is no transcendent mind, it's only a materialistic world. You can't have that from that worldview. You are contradicting yourself constantly. And I'm trying to help you see that so that you can abandon your atheistic worldview because it's self-refuting.
That's quite a gallop. Okay.
More trotting.
So, well, you said a lot there. It's going to be difficult for me to go back and do.
Well, I can give you one point at a time if you'd like.
And address each thing. I'm not sure I need it, but so all of those things that you said I can't do, I can. One of the things that you repeated that we already talked about and re-talked about, and I, for lack of a better term, corrected, was this transcendent abstraction. Okay, and I said I wasn't sure if it was transcendent, if it was based on your definition. Abstraction, I said I didn't have a problem with. So that's a bit of a
talk about that then. That's
a bit of a straw man in a minute. And you said that I can't have a moral standard. Yeah, I can. You don't think it's valid. You don't think that it's valid.
No, you can have a moral standard, just not an objective, transcendent one.
And I disagree with you. And I established my moral standard. You don't agree with it, but you can't give me your moral standard without begging the question, which is what you accuse me of doing. And so one of the most interesting thing that you said there was, that if something was falsifiable, and if the thing that you believe grounds all of this stuff, it's supernatural. We don't have any way to falsify that. So what's the good in that? You talk about all these things. You said, well, we could work and falsify something, but your whole standard isn't even falsifiable.
If we apprehend something, then the something is not ourselves. If we apprehend something, so if I were to grab a bar and hold onto a bar so I don't fall, it's not me. Earlier, you agreed that we apprehend, we lay hold of a moral value. That means, by definition, that the moral value is not us or not part of what we are, as in our inventing it or as part of our nature and our essence. Because if I were to say that murder is wrong and you agree, well, our agreement doesn't make it right. It doesn't make it wrong. It's just an agreement.
But it does if we go back to my standard of well-being, it does.
No, because
sure it does.
No, because you haven't.
Why doesn't it?
Because you have not justified that your standard is the correct one to use. You just state that it is.
You agree that well-being is better than not well-being, so we're in agreement with that.
Wait a minute. You stripped it out of the context of what I said.
I asked you a direct question.
Yes, and what was my answer?
Your answer was yes, but you have to ground it in God, and we don't need that. That's superfluous.
Whoa. No. Don't do what the Eastern Orthodox guys. They're my new standard of bad. I had a debate Sunday night. The new standard of bad, Eastern Orthodox guys. Don't EO me. Take part of what I said out of the whole to represent the whole. It's called the.
No. So what I said is I asked you if well-being was good, and you agreed with me, and then you added to that. What you added to it was superfluous. We don't need it.
What I said was, I'll have to repeat this for you and for the benefit of the listeners who may have come in, is that I would say that reducing harm is good because of people being made in the image of God, and that we ought to treat people properly because of that. The reason—
That's the superfluous part. We don't need that.
The reason that I am saying it is based in something, so therefore it's not superfluous. The reason for it is based in a worldview. Everybody has a worldview, and my worldview is my Christian one. Your worldview is an atheist one. Yeah. And so you're saying that your worldview is based upon your atheistic assumptions, that there is no God.
I didn't say that.
God is not allowed to be part of your explanatory nature.
I didn't say that either.
Is it true that God is not allowed to be part of your explanatory abilities and scope within discussions?
No, absolutely not. You allow God in your worldview. If you could demonstrate that it's real, sure.
I said, do you allow that God can be part of your explanatory worldview in your atheism? That you said you believe strongly God does not exist.
I believe strongly God does not exist. Now, if you could show that I'm incorrect in that, then I would be happy to accept that as part of an explanatory.
You're not listening. I said you don't include God as part of your explanatory scope because
Why don't I? Why don't I?
Because you said you believe there is no God.
No, and I clarified it. What did I just say in clarification?
You said if I can demonstrate God exists, that's a different topic.
No, it's not. It's completely part of it. What you started to do was actually misrepresent me. What you said is you said, due to your atheistic thing, you don't allow supernatural, you don't allow God. And I said, no, that's actually not necessarily true. If you could demonstrate that this God was actually real, which I expect Andrew to jump in on in a second, if you could demonstrate that God was actually real, then I would include it in that. I don't include things that haven't been shown to be real. I view those as superfluous. If you can show that it's actually real, past your presupposition, I'm happy to entertain that possibility. But don't misrepresent what I'm saying.
Do you include God in any of your worldview explanations of phenomena?
Currently, no.
Okay, so then what I'm saying is correct. All right. So since we both beg the question, we both will assume certain values, certain positions to begin with. The issue becomes which worldview can account for those. Your worldview, which is atheistic, you do not include God in any of your worldview explanations.
Currently.
That's what I said, present tense.
I do not currently.
That's correct. You don't do that. You currently do not do that. That's correct. So because of your atheism, you currently deny God as a possible contributor to explanatory issue, to explain various phenomena.
I currently exclude God as an explanation, not as a possible explanation, as an explanation.
Okay. So is any explanation a possible explanation?
Is any explanation a possible? No, it depends on, no, I mean, you can't just say anything as an explanation for something. There has to be all kinds of stuff to back it up.
So there can be different possibilities to explain things.
Different possibilities to explain things. I think there are standards. I think we'd look at evidence, for example, and there are standards, that we would count something as evidence. Like, for example, a piece of physical evidence would hold more weight than your anecdotal account, for example.
So what you're doing is you assume certain things. I assume certain things. When I assume the Trinitarian Christian God, everything can make sense. When you deny the Trinitarian God,
currently deny as an explanation. Matt, you're super interesting the way you try to use words, but I'm going to hold your feet to the fire a little bit and not allow you to misrepresent what I'm saying.
He's not misrepresenting you. You keep validating that every time he asks you a question. You validate that he's not.
I'm clarifying.
Yeah, but you're clarifying is your misrepresentation. Every time he asks you very specific, you end up agreeing with it. He's already done this like 3 times. And then you go, you're misrepresenting. You're the one misrepresenting your position because you keep agreeing when he clarifies it. So we got about 15 minutes, Matt, because he wanted to answer a question for Anthony. So,
okay, so you currently do not include God in your worldview.
That's fair.
Okay, and so therefore, any explanations for phenomena, you currently will not include God as a possibility.
Any phenomena currently not include God as a possibility because it hasn't been. Yeah, that's fair. Sure.
All right. So everybody begs questions, and I'll say this again. From the Christian Trinitarian position, I can account for universal morals, our existence, and I can account for the necessary preconditions for intelligibility. You have not demonstrated. We haven't even discussed are necessary preconditions for intelligibility, nor have we discussed our nature and our existence and how we got here. You want to discuss the issue of morality.
Mhm.
What you've done is you have just simply, it's an arbitrary standard that you have, because you can't appeal to a transcendent necessity that your definition is the right one, applicable to all people. A transcendent necessity, a necessity is an abstraction. A necessity by logic, a necessity by morality is an abstraction that occurs. To have a necessary abstraction, a necessary moral thing, you cannot and have not demonstrated from your worldview is correct. You cannot substantiate it. What you've done is you have said that you believe that from your senses, which are subjective, your interpretive methodology, which is subjective, that you believe that people ought to adhere to the idea of the well-being mandate that you stated.
And we talked about that, and I amended that.
You have not justified that your well-being mandate is the transcendent necessity, is a necessity that is objective, that does not reside in you, but resides universally elsewhere, to which all people are subject. If you don't establish that from your worldview, then it's nothing more, no disrespect meant, nothing more than your opinion. And I don't really need to argue your opinion, because it's blue is better than green. Who cares?
Blue's better. So again, the whole ought to, we talked about, and I amended, and you keep on trying to turn it into something that I didn't say. I said at the very beginning that I wasn't convinced that morals were either objective or subjective, but I do believe that I have this objective standard that we start from, well-being, which you agreed with. You then added this extra thing. You added the extra thing.
No, you're misrepresenting me.
So you don't think that well-being is better than not well-being? Because that's what I said and you agreed to.
No, I said well-being can only, let me clarify, well-being can only be better than non-well-being if we have a standard by which we judge, and that standard has to be rooted in God. Your standard would be subjective. Your standard would be a bunch of people say so, and that's why it's true. Argumentum ad populum, it's a logical fallacy. You can't validate any way. If I were to ask you, give me a sentence to justify why well-being, reduction of harm, is a proper moral standard to begin with. If I were to say, give me a thing, just one sentence, I will show you why it doesn't work. Give me another sentence, I'll show you why it doesn't work. Each and every time.
And what you do to try to get around it and ground it is you appeal to this undemonstrated standard as if it was actually an explanation for everything. And what I do is I just say, okay, let's take this thing that we don't need and put it aside. My standard of well-being works just fine, and as far as lots of people agreeing with it, I did say that I believe that morals were an emergent property. If you go back, and I know pretty much everybody watching this is not going to agree, but when Homo sapiens were nomadic, many tens of thousands of years ago, when they started to come together and they started to realize that, okay, so if we stay in one place, the herds tend to go around, they end up coming back to us. And if we stay together, we can avoid larger predators and things like that. And I'm sure that those first number of decades, maybe even centuries, was pretty sticky with people killing each other and all kinds of other stuff. But then they started to realize that, hey, if we work together and if we don't kill each other, then we can actually do better. And then these emergent properties start coming out of it. And then eventually we get to the standard of well-being, where we can look at it and say, if we both agree that well-being is better than not well-being, and we start from there and employ the other things that I said, like consequential ethics and all these other things, then we can actually work towards a standard of morality. And we don't need anything else. We can just push those other things aside, like gods, because we don't need them. But we can work on these standards all on our lonesomes, and we can come up with standards, and we can flourish as a result. And so you keep on saying that I had this. You say it's objective. When in the very start I said that I wasn't necessarily convinced that it was objective or subjective, and that there are good arguments on both sides. So you're trying to say that I'm saying one thing when I've said multiple times that I'm not necessarily convinced.
Okay, let me finish here. Hold on, Andrew. You said if we both agree and we start from there. That's your thing. Let me get this out. If we both agree and start from there. You asked me a narrow question earlier. I answered the narrow question. But you see, I don't believe that it is the proper moral standard to begin with to say that a reduction of harm is the right moral standard. I deny that as a truth. You accept it. You accept it. I deny it. I do deny it. I would say that morality rests beginning in the character and the nature of God. You have not demonstrated the objective standard that you have. You claim you have, but you've not. Now, I have not yet, just so you know, I have not yet seriously tackled the issue of the sufficiency of the Trinitarian God being the necessary preconditions for intelligibility, our existence, and morality. You said I haven't demonstrated. Well, I haven't even got into that. We've been examining your worldview. Sure. And I've poked holes in your worldview left and right. The only thing you've come back with is your subjective preferences and say, if we both agree. But here's the thing, we don't. So all of your house of cards comes falling down because I don't agree with it. And you see, your starting point is a subjective starting point. That from the very beginning, as I tried to tell you, what makes you think that that's the right starting point? Because I'm just saving this for later. I don't believe it's the right starting point. Now, because they want to have some more discussions. If you want to have another discussion where we continue with the nature and the essence of the Trinitarian God, we can talk about that. But you've not been able to establish your position.
Yeah, I'd love to. And just to sorry, Andrew, just to finish up, Matt, thanks for hanging in. I'm glad that your stomach turned the corner in a good way.
Thank you. And thanks for letting me be excused to use the restroom 3 and about number 4 coming up here. I drink a lot of liquid to get it through me, and it worked. Sorry.
And I'm not sure if you're going to hang around when Anthony pops in or not. But
I like heresy.
Yeah, well, stick around. First off, I do have to embarrass Matt a little bit. He did about it.
So you want me to story? A little background first, because I'll say the quick story. Andrew is a complete jerk. He's a moron. He's a jerk. He's a butthead. And the reason he is because he has successfully, to my embarrassment, he has successfully outsmarted me numerous times in buying me lunches. And
I've heard this story. I've heard it's infamous at this point.
Yes, it is. And even at one point when I was mocking him at Manti, and and I paid my own bill. See, hey, like that. I walk over to the Coke machine, and the lady behind the counter goes, "Hey, your card didn't go through." And I go, "No!" And he whips out his card and beats me yet again. This kind of thing has happened so many times, and I hate to give any kudos to such a jerk as Andrew, but he does deserve it. Okay, so I went and saw a friend with another friend. Joe and I went to see, 2 hours from here, 100 miles away in the city of Twin Falls. We went and saw a friend of ours, Braden. And Braden, he's a great guy. Ex-Mormon, became a Calvinist, loves the Lord. He's got a new wife, new baby, bought a new house, just trying to make ends meet. Okay, just trying to, and not knocking him. Hey, when my wife and I got married, we lived on a futon on the floor of my mom and dad's spare room. Okay, you do what you got to do to survive till you get back on your feet. And he's on his feet. But at any rate, so his car's out in the driveway. It's got dust all over it and raindrops all over it. And he has another vehicle. And his wife has to get up and take him to work because the car batteries is dead and they don't have enough money to get another one. $100. So we're out and about, and Joe is driving and stuff. And so I said, "Hey, can we go to Costco really fast? I want to check something out." I've been looking at survival food. I have been. I just threw it out. So we go there, and I start heading over to the auto parts place. I'm just going to buy a battery, whatever. I text my wife, "Hey, we haven't been tithing to the church recently. Could you just do this for him?" He goes, "Yeah, sure." She's great. And so Brandon said, "What are you doing?" I go, "I'm going to buy you a battery." "What kind of car is it?" He goes, "You can't do that." "Yes, I can. Yes, I can." And I'm arguing with him a little bit, and I have my card in my hand, and I'm getting ready to put it into the machine. I'm looking at the machine, and Braden goes, "No, I don't want you to do that." I turn around and say, "Don't deny me the blessing." I turn back, and Joe got his card out and put it in first.
Now, I've done that to you. So clearly, you don't learn from your mistakes.
Immediately thought of Andrew. I go, what a jerk! It's just like Andrew. And so I pushed Joe out, and Joe could wrestle me to the ground. He works in security, gets in a regular, wrestle. Unless I punch him in the throat first, it's not going to happen. He lets me kind of. I shove him out of the way, and so he doesn't get his hand in his card in the reader. I shove him pretty, hard enough. He takes a couple steps to the left and hands his card underneath the plexiglass to the guy, and the guy takes it. So I got outsmarted by Joe. And stuff like that. And I'm like, oh, yeah. So Joe said, no, you need to spend your money on ministry. So anyway, I arranged a blessing for Braden anyway. But the whole point is that, I got outsmarted.
Again.
He admitted to it.
My phone here. Yeah, you guys are jerks. That's all I can say.
Oh, I love it. Matt tries so hard and fails every time. It's great.
Man, I can't believe it. Gosh.
Andrew, I think the polite thing would be to just give him one. Like, let him have one.
No.
I'm going to. I have to outsmart him, because if as soon as I do, even though it'll be one time, I'm going to rub it in all the time. I'm going to moonwalk.
See, this is the clearest. This is the clearest demonstration that atheist morality is superior, because I just let him have it.
Yeah. Well, actually, what I was going to say is this is a demonstration that Andrew's well-being is more important.
Yeah.
Well, he certainly seems like it. Look how much he's laughing. He's so happy right now. He's clearly just bubbling.
But we're all getting a kick out of it too.
I've actually called up Matt's radio program.
Yeah, you have.
Yeah, and I go, and my question will be, why am I a jerk?
Yeah, because you're a jerk.
Like, no story.
He's done it so many times. I've got up 20 minutes early at a restaurant to go pay the bill. It's paid. Crap.
He went to the restaurant early, worked it out with the waiter. The problem was he didn't work it out with the lady who was actually taking the bill. He worked it out with the waiter.
I did that at a restaurant. I said, don't let this guy, he's a complete moron jerk. He's got mental problems. Let me take care of this. And you still ended up. There's
even video of that. But all right. Yeah. So I know you had a question for Anthony, but I want to ask you a quick question really quick. And this, we can get into more detail. So we can have the discussion with Matt again. But do you believe in a free will?
Sorry, are you asking me?
Yeah, I'm asking you, Michael. Do you believe what's referred to as a free will? Meaning, the choice, the making choices between good and bad.
It's really interesting. I've read some books on this. Sam Harris wrote an interesting book on it, and I've read a little bit about it. And there's some interesting science, and apparently there's some science that says that most decisions we make, that like before we actually make the decision to do whatever it is, that as like a number of milliseconds before we actually make the decision unconsciously. So I think I'm not sure. Now, when it comes to like mundane things, like the difference between, buying, that the little shoddy thing that Matt just showed up was an Android phone versus something sophisticated like an iPhone. I think we can make.
I beat him on that one again as well. I got the iPhone.
Yeah, I think we can make mundane choices like that, and whether or not someone has a grilled cheese sandwich or a hot dog for lunch, I think those are absolutely things we can decide. So as far as like real free will,
morality.
Yes, I think so. I think so.
You think there is? Because the reason I bring it up is. And you can go look, because this, when you talk about your whole idea of well-being, there's an article called "There Is No Such Thing as Free Will" by Stephen Cave. Okay,
I'm not familiar with that.
He is not a Christian. He's arguing his argument is they ended up doing a bunch of studies, 4, 5, 6 studies with different people. And his argument is, based on the research, it is better to think that there is a free will, even though we know there isn't one. Why? Because in your example where you want a way to falsify your well-being argument, and the argument of the morality that he will argue. The science shows that when you do not believe in being accountable, then you will always resort to cheating, stealing, lying, doing whatever you can to get away with things. Which is, so when you actually have any society where you put atheism in play, it always deteriorates to the worst element every time. So when you say that we don't need God, there's no evidence historically to support that, because every time it's tried, it's led to mass murder every time. So you had something you wanted to ask Anthony that you said from the beginning, and so I told Anthony that you wanted to apologize for a question that you didn't answer of his.
Yeah.
So,
Man, I feel like Andrew, you don't like Justin, do you? You keep on tossing him in the background like every second. You keep on just putting him in the background. So I would say, Andrew, if you have the capacity to link that paper or something, or the author's name or something like that, I'd be super curious to look at that. Because I'm not sure where I stand on the issue of free will, although I think it's interesting. Christopher Hitchens once said, he said morality is why you do the right thing when no one's watching. And I think that's very interesting. Like Matt, you alluded to that earlier. You said, it's like if you drop your wallet and didn't notice it, you return it and stuff like that. Why do you do the right thing when no one's watching? I think it's interesting, and it's something that I sit on the fence about, and I don't think I've read enough about. I
dropped it in the chat.
I see it there. So Anthony,
There's another problem. You don't have free will. You can't defend it. There's no culpability.
Matt, we can't hear you. Your mic is.
Can't hear you.
Your mic's up in the air.
Sorry about that. If you don't have free will, then you can't demonstrate that morals have any penalty or any culpability in moral action if there's not freedom. In a materialistic worldview, you can't justify freedom in your mind, so therefore morality becomes superfluous. It becomes a meaningless concept. That's a whole other issue to talk about.
Yeah, like I said, I haven't really, free will is something that I've read a little bit about, but I don't think I've studied close enough.
Have you studied what's called property dualism and substance dualism? Do you know what those terms are?
I know of them, but I'm not super familiar with them. You're going to drag me down. You're going to drag me down a tangent. I'm not going to get to talk to Anthony.
Yeah, we want to give him. Yeah,
go ahead.
No, Matt, I really enjoyed talking to you. I had some people say I shouldn't do it, but I'm glad that I did. It doesn't matter
because I'm so slick.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Anyway, Anthony, at the start of our last discussion, the very first question you asked me was, why do I care? And I didn't answer that question. And we got sidetracked and sent down other angles, and I never got back to it. And about 2 hours after we finished, I was like, yeah, I said something worse to myself. And I'm like, I never answered that question. And so I apologize for not answering it, and I owe you an answer. And we can talk more about it. I don't know if we'll have time tonight, but maybe another time if Andrew decides to have me back again. You said, why do I have a podcast? Why do I do these things if I don't care, if I don't think that this God exists? And the simple answer is, and I don't mean this to be insulting in any way, and it's because I'm only talking to you and the royal you. I know Andrew and everybody else is still in the background, and I, to a certain degree, exclude you because I try not to lump everybody together. Just like I would hope you don't lump all atheists together into the same pot. That is that I do what I do because some Christians do what they do, and when I talk to people who deny science and who want to involuntarily impose their will on other people, that's why I care. And that's why I do what I do. Again, to go back to something Christopher Hitchens said once, he said, I talk to believers of all stripes all the time. He said, and they have this great truth, and they walk around so convinced that they have this truth, and you think that it would make them happy. It doesn't make them happy. They can't be happy until you believe it too. And I would think that if if that were the case, then I wouldn't have anything to talk about because it wouldn't be an issue. So I know that there are some very middle of the road, just call them middle of the road type Christians who just, they're happy to believe and kind of live and let live and these other types of things. But there are some real extremists out there. And not to drop too many names, but I think of people like Steven Anderson. And I think of people like Matt Powell. People who are vile individuals. They truly are vile people. When someone like Steven Anderson anybody of your viewers can watch this video where he stands at his pulpit and he says, if I had a button and I push this button every time I pushed it, and he said a horrible thing, a person, a homosexual person would die. He said, I pushed it till my finger broke. And I watched that video and I started crying because I have families who are LGBT, family members who are LGBT, and dear friends of mine that are LGBT. And to think that such a despicable, someone who says he's, a Christian would say something so vile. That's why I do what I do. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, no, that does. And it gives us a lot of stuff to talk about on a future show.
Yeah.
So, I have to say this, then.
Sure.
When it comes to Steven Anderson, there's Christians who also cry when they see some of those antics, but for a different reason.
Would you be one of those?
Oh yeah, I would, because I would rather see a homosexual come to faith in Christ before they die, so that they could go to heaven for eternity rather than hell. And so, yes, I do cry for that reason. But again, that is a very different reason than yours.
Sure.
Yours is a subjective reason. I mean, you and Matt, I'm not going to open up anything else. I mean, you and Matt went around about on that tonight, because the question I would ask you is, again, why do you care? I mean, I understand that you have a difference in your worldview versus Christian, but in terms of what we do it because of God. Everything is based off of his truth. And so we do these things as a result of that. What I tried doing 2 weeks ago, what Matt tried doing tonight, what Andrew tried doing 3 weeks ago, was to show that if you don't believe in God and whatever happens after this life, it doesn't matter, then that was, I guess, the reason why I say, why do you care?
Yeah, and I think it's because, again, you have some of these despicable individuals, and if they had their druthers, like you have, and it is in no way, shape, or form. Am I picking on Christians because people who adhere to Islam do horrible things too, like, handcuff people, take them to the top of buildings and throw them off buildings, or, behead them, or put them in cages and, put like bonfires under the cages, all these unbelievable things. And I guess when I'm sitting there and I'm watching this, I'm like, well, according to your worldview, they're going to hell. Isn't that enough? Like, do you have to, so they're going to live 50, 60 years or something like that. And, depending on what brand of Christianity or whatever it is you adhere to, they're going to hell and like fire, whatever. Or maybe just, if you're an annihilationist, who knows? I don't know. Different people believe different things, right? So, yeah, that's, but yeah, different people believe different things for sure. And so, for me, I'd be like, well, this is what you think is going to happen to them. Isn't that enough? Like you have to, you have to, torture them or kill them, in this life too. And so anyway, and that's again, I do what I do for those specific reasons. And I say, present company, hopefully excluded.
I think it's very interesting to say that, because as Anthony said, what is it that genuine Christians, I don't put Steven Anderson in that category, but
I wonder what he'd think of your opinion of he not being a Christian.
That's okay. But the thing is that you see genuine Christians want, as Anthony said, those who practice homosexuality to get saved. Okay. Yet you don't do what you do against Islam, who's throwing them off buildings. So,
Oh, sure, I do. Yeah.
you do?
Yep.
I
Absolutely.
I didn't see that on your channel.
Well, podcast, yeah. One of my next door neighbors. So if I walk out my door straight ahead, opposite to you, I guess on this side of me is a Baptist family, and on this side of me is a Muslim family, and I'm friends with both of them. Cindy and Ian are the Muslim family. They both converted to Islam and have 4 beautiful children, and Sergio and Karen on the other side have 2 amazing boys. And I have great conversations with them both. And I'm constantly, we have these dueling matches, for lack of a better term, where we're constantly talking about this stuff, and we'll sit down. And I have another friend, Mo, who now lives in Calgary, moved away from Toronto, but we would sit down, and he gave me an English copy of the Quran. He said, this is the best translation I could find. And then we would go through it together. And I went to his mosque and stuff like that. And I have these conversations with pretty much anybody. So I do. And I'm not, I'm not hesitant to speak out against, and again, no offense meant. I'm not afraid to speak out against anybody who believes silly things.
Yeah. Well, Anthony, were you going to say something?
Yeah. One other thing is that you said something about science, and I want to be absolutely clear. I talked about 2 weeks ago. Christians do believe in science. It is not a mutually exclusive position. You either believe in the Bible or you believe in science. I wrote a book on this. I believe the only way you can do correct science is and be able to account for doing good science is when you stand on the Christian worldview. And we talked about that 2 weeks ago. So
yeah.
Listeners understand that we do absolutely believe in science.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, let me, I'm going to put you guys in the back. We'll close up the show. Let me just give some closing comments. I know that, I do think Michael's going to be back next week. We're going to have Pastor Justin is going to have Sean Waugh in, and that will be dealing with the subject of politics. I think we have 2 weeks of topics on politics, 2 or 3. Although if folks want to come in and ask questions, as we had with little Anthony, you're saying 4 weeks. I see you holding up your hand for 4.
Yeah, so Sean Waugh, who we had back on in I think February,
coming twice. Is that it? And then Chuck,
he's going to be 2 weeks in a row. Then we Pastor Ken Fontenot.
Oh, that's right. I forgot Pastor Ken, and then Chuck. Okay,
and then
politics.
I'm still trying to get the contract signed for Chuck O'Neill.
Yeah,
October 29th. I gave him the prime slot right before the election. So
yeah. And then we do, either we'll have Michael on, or I will say that there's been people that have been asking Anthony about, are we going to get back to dealing with a certain church in Iowa? All I can say, and you're aware of this, that you prodded me to do some study and research. I am working on something that will, let's just say, maybe blows the doors open, right? I mean, would that be a fair? It's gonna cause some problems over there, probably.
I mean, fairly, but yes, it'll
expose some things that they don't want exposed. But here's the thing. Just as we close out, I want you guys. We do this again, and you guys have noticed. I'm not going to shy away from saying these things when Michael's here. He's still here. He's still listening. We'll end up going off air and discussing things. But I want you guys to notice, what was the one thing he couldn't answer? In fact, refused to answer over and over. Matt kept asking him one question. Why is well-being the standard? And what did he do every time? He kept flipping it to say, well, do you think well-being is good? Now, notice the difference there. Asking whether well-being is good. Yes, Matt could say well-being is good because we're created in the image of God. He has a reason for it. Okay. He did what Michael could not do. He gave why well-being could be a standard. But the standard really isn't the well-being, because the standard well-being is only good because we're created in the image of God. Therefore, God is the ultimate standard. He's kind of just sitting in midair saying, yes, this is the standard, because he doesn't have the foundation underneath him. And that's why you saw Matt kept going to it, and he kept flipping it back to Matt and saying, well, do you think it's good? Well, show me where it's not. And the thing that you end up seeing is he can't demonstrate that. And that is why he has to do this. Now, I also, and I encourage you, re-listen to the 3 episodes that Michael's been on, and you'll see I've pointed it out each time, because the purpose of doing this is not just so you guys see a debate going on, but we want to train you in how to identify tactics, how to learn, so that you could be better in apologetics. That's the purpose of the show. So what you end up seeing is what he would keep doing is make very bold statements. You'll hear him consistently use certain words. Factual, it's absolute, abundantly clear. And then when you press him to defend it, he pleads ignorance. And he's done this all 3 weeks. You'll see where he uses things that say that they're absolute terms as if it's irrefutable, but they're just claims. And this is what you see people do all the time. And Christians do it as well. But what you saw was, you saw how Matt defended and could root what he's saying in things and supported his claims. And Michael just is making the claims. Now, here's the one thing that I think, what I picked up on, what I think Michael is doing. And this is where he's a little bit nuanced from other professing atheists. And this is the thing you always want to do. You want to be looking at what it is these guys are doing to spot what it seems to me that Michael's doing. And I think he thinks it's like a gotcha type questions, but it seems like what he's doing is taking arguments that he hears Christians making, and he looks at them, and then what it seems he's trying to do is try to find a way to make the same arguments. You saw this last time when he said to Anthony and tried arguing he's a Muslim and was trying to use the same arguments. It's a gotcha type thing to try to show, see, you can't make an argument against me because I've just used your argument. The difference, though, and I'd encourage you to go back and re-listen to this debate with this in mind, or this discussion really wasn't a debate, but go through and listen. Because as you go through and listen, you end up hearing that he's arguing, trying to make the same claims, but there's one major difference between them. Matt's is rooted in an absolute source, and Michael's was not. Michael's was just they were just claims. Okay? Matt had them rooted in something. There was a foundation. Well-being is not a standard. It can't be a standard, because once you go to some subjective standard, Hitler thought well-being meant killing off the less human people, all of the Jews and the blacks and the mentally retarded and gypsies, eliminate them to create a superior race that would produce well-being in his mind. But there's disagreement there. Well, if there's disagreement, then it can't be an absolute standard. It can't be an objective standard. And therefore, that morality is no longer objective. You have an objective standard. Everyone can look at it, observe it, and know that it's true. That's the difference you end up seeing. So I do think Michael will probably be back. I hope that you guys enjoyed this, and we'll be back next week. Anthony and I will not be here, at least next week. I think the next 2 weeks, Justin will be here with Shanwa. You won't want to miss that. And going for a couple weeks into politics, we stayed away from talking about the debate that wasn't a debate. No, not tonight's. I was referring to Trump and Biden. Yeah. All right. Until next time. Oh, wait, Anthony's raising his.
Hold on. You know what? We made a mistake because of this goof up from this week. We gotta no. Next Thursday is Pastor Ken Fontenot.
I thought you couldn't be here though.
No. I remember I'm coming to your house.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah. So we're going to be in the same room as we're hosting that show with Pastor Ken. That'll be a hoot. The man of.
He's got, yeah, we will wait to see what kind of suit he wears. For folks who don't know Pastor Ken, he has the most colorful suits.
Awesome.
And he pulls them off. That's the thing. I couldn't pull off the suits he wears.
Banana yellow one day, bright cherry red the next. It's incredible how he does it. So actually on next week. Then we have Sean on the 15th and the 22nd.
Yeah, we'll be talking about politics the first week, and then the next week, I believe we're going to surprise everybody and bat up and do a thing on what is that? Freemasonry. Yeah, that's right.
Oh yeah,
Right.
I want that one.
So I actually just talked to Sean this morning.
So did I.
And then
He texted me after he talked to you.
He texted me after he talked to all of you.
and then
Well, weird because I told him to talk to Colleen Sharp, so he must think you look like Colleen.
I do. I'm just that good looking, I guess, that handsome.
and then the 29th is the one that we have I believe is going to be Pastor Chuck O'Neill again.
Okay. So when we get to November, we'll probably, we're going to have, I'm sure we'll be able to set some things up with Michael and Matt again. Michael and Justin, sorry. Michael and Anthony, I think they had something to finish up as well, but I know you guys want morality more. And then maybe by then Michael will have studied free will, and we'll see whether he gives up on believe it or ever thinking that free will can't exist or choices in morality can't exist, because that's actually the article really dismantles atheism without realizing it. But if you just believe in chemical reactions, then your choice is not, and that's what he basically argues in that article. And I dropped the link earlier. The proof is that if you're just chemical reactions, like Michael believes, then you really don't have choices. Those are just chemical reactions. And if you believe that, it shows that society always fails. It always goes to the worst. People always act worse in those circumstances. So that's what we got for you. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope you learned a lot. I hope it was educational, entertaining. I at least was entertained that Matt got out slicked again. And maybe we'll end with a clip from, a debate that Matt had with David Smalley, and David Smalley said this.
Mr. Smalley, do you believe that abortion is moral?
Oh boy.